patient with a known previous TB treatment history. So this refers to any patients who do not fall under the first four categories. Okay, usually this is a result of poor record keeping. Okay, they could be phase. Okay, so for regimen, so you're all familiar, right, already with the acronyms that we use. Okay, so what is HRZE? Anyone? Even sa comments, it's okay.
It's like the RIPES, the rifampicin, isoniazid,
Okay.
pyrazinamide, ethambutol, and
Ethambutol. Okay, so at least you're familiar already with those treatments. How about so HRR? What are these two medications? HR. You already mentioned
Isoniazid and rifampicin, Doc.
isoniazid and rifampicin. Okay, so you will notice that both regimens 1 and 2 have the same 2-month course for the first four medications. But for the continuation phase, isoniazid and rifampicin, the difference is that for regimen 2, they take they last for another 10 months. Okay? The important thing here to note is that one, for regimen 1, this can deal with pulmonary TB or extrapulmonary TB, except the CNS, the bones, and the joints. Because automatically, if the CNS, the bones, and the joints are involved, then they become eligible for regimen 2. Okay? And then you will notice that we now deal, before when I was a clerk, we were basing this on the results of the smear microscopy or the sputum microscopy. But this time around, the results are now based on GeneXpert. So whether they are rifampicin sensitive or indeterminate, for as long as these do not involve the central nervous system, the bones, and the joints, then definitely they are candidates for regimen 1. Another category will be those patients who are clinically diagnosed or positive on smear microscopy, and we don't detect Mycobacterium tuberculosis through GeneXpert. I have emphasized this yesterday. It is possible to make a diagnosis of clinically diagnosed tuberculosis in the absence of a positive expert result if the other laboratories, the other clinical features, the X-ray findings are really suggestive of TB. Then we can commit these patients as clinically diagnosed TB. Okay. GeneXpert, despite the sensitivity and the specificity, are still somewhat limited. Okay. In contrast, anything that involves the CNS, the bones, and the joints, then definitely we'll do regimen 2. The key here is that the rifampicin sensitivity should be the rifampicin test should either be sensitive or indeterminate. I think this is something that you have discussed already when you were in pharmacology, but we will run through them again. So of course, for the four commonly used TB, there can be minor and major adverse drug reactions. So for the minor drug reactions, this includes gastrointestinal intolerance, localized skin reactions. So, orange-colored urine is always asked for rifampicin, but I will not be asking this in the exam, okay? Because that's a very easy question. And then peripheral neuropathy is associated with isoniazid. Hyperuricemia is one of the minor side effects of pyrazinamide. And sometimes you can see flu-like symptoms, fever, muscle pain, inflammation of the respiratory tract with rifampicin. So for the management, for the most times, these are straightforward. Antihistamines, aspirin, and NSAID for the pain, antipyretics. But of course, for hyperuricemia, we will have to consult either a family medical medicine specialist or an internist. One important thing to remember is that for patients with peripheral neuropathy secondary to isoniazid use, we give vitamin B6 or pyridoxine. Okay. So you don't have to memorize the doses for now, but remember that pyridoxine is given to patients who are suffering from peripheral neuropathy due to isoniazid. For any of the drugs, the usual side effect is actually usually has something to do with the gastrointestinal tract, vomiting, diarrhea, abdominal pain. But for certain drugs, these are the most prominent findings, such as in the first three, rifampicin, isoniazid, and pyrazinamide. Okay. The major adverse reactions are relatively uncommon, but we have to be familiar with them as well. Not only to not only to reassure the patient, but also to make the appropriate management should any of these major adverse drug reactions arise. Any of the drugs, in particular, all drugs can result in hypersensitivity reactions, okay? And you will notice that for major adverse drug reactions, the key management step is always to stop the anti-TB medication first before referring to a subspecialist, okay? Unlike in the minor drug reactions wherein we can just, give antipyretics, we can give pyridoxine, but for major drug reactions, the first step is to stop giving the anti-TB medication. So any of the drugs can cause hypersensitivity. The three that can cause gastrointestinal symptoms can also result in jaundice. So there can be TB-induced hepatitis. Okay. Ethambutol, this is very classic. Optic neuritis might result from ethambutol use. So we have to refer the patient to an ophthalmologist. Rifampicin, there can be rifampicin-induced nephropathy, and we can see this in the volume of the urine or in the presence of albumin in the urine. So when you do your dipstick test, the protein will be positive. Okay. Um, Certain neuropsychiatric symptoms are also associated with isoniazid, in particular psychosis and convulsion. I'm not sure if you haven't taken psych, no, but when you go to your psychiatry module, the first thing that you will always have to remember whenever you are dealing with psychotic symptoms before you give antipsychotics is that is there any underlying medical cause before you make a diagnosis of schizophrenia? Okay, and in TB patients, if the patient presents with psychotic symptoms, then isoniazid will be the primary culprit. Rifampicin, unfortunately, is associated with certain hematologic disturbances, including thrombocytopenia, anemia, and shock. So you have to be aware of this, of all these major adverse effects, although they are not really common. And again, the key step for any adverse drug reactions will be to stop the medication before referring to the appropriate specialist. So let's say that you have patients who receive the regimens for drug susceptible TB. Definitely, we have to document whether these patients responded to the treatment. That is why, di ba, we have a categorization earlier. So again, you have to classify the patients, whether they are clinically diagnosed or whether they are bacteriologically confirmed TB. So when do we do sputum follow-up examinations? Okay, so for both clinically diagnosed and bacteriologically confirmed TB, as well as for patients who are on retreatment, at the end of the intensive phase or the first 2 months, we have to do a follow-up. But the follow-up for sputum testing differs during the continuation phase. Okay, for instance, for clinically diagnosed TB who are positive at the end of the intensive phase, we have a second and a third follow-up at the end of the 5th month and at the end of the 6th month. In contrast, um, all patients who are bacteriologically confirmed, regardless of the result of the first follow-up, we have to do sputum examination at the end of the 5th month and at the end of the 6th month. So earlier we were mentioning about the treatment outcomes. So far you should be able to classify whether the patients are bacteriologically confirmed or clinically diagnosed. Based on the results of the gene expert, you should be able to classify whether the patients are drug susceptible or drug resistant. I also gave you the categorization for PISH treatment, meaning the patient dies for reasons that might not be, let's say, an accident, that might not be related to the treatment, then regardless whether that patient had results on the second, positive or negative results on the 2nd month, that patient, the treatment outcome will be died. Okay? We consider cure whenever a patient with bacteriologically confirmed TB at the beginning of treatment has a smear or culture negative results in the last month of treatment and on at least one previous occasion in the continuation phase. Usually, this one previous occasion is the 5th month. Okay? For treatment completed, these refer to patients who have completed their treatment without evidence of failure but no smear negative results in the last month of treatment were obtained and on at least one previous occasion. Okay? So there are two possible reasons why these results are not available. Either they were not done or the results were unavailable at the treatment, but we are sure that the patient has religiously followed the treatment up to the 6th month. Okay? Clinically diagnosed patients who completed treatment also fall under this category, treatment completed. The largest category will be treatment failed, and there are four possible categories for under treatment failed. The first one is the sputum smear or culture is positive at 5 months or later. Okay? Sometimes, if the treatment is terminated because of acquired resistance, such as rifampicin resistance on expert at the 2nd month, then that's already treatment failed. So initially, the patient is drug susceptible, but on the testing on the 2nd month, there is already rifampicin resistance, not in the terminata, positive resistance, then the treatment failed. If the follow-up sputum was not done and there is no clinical improvement, that is also treatment failed. So that is the difference. It's possible that the follow-up sputum was not done for treatment completed in patients who have completed the 6 months, but there is clinical improvement, then we can classify them as treatment completed. But if the sputum examination was not done and there was no improvement, it's already treatment failed. Lastly, you will remember from our previous slides that the moment there is major drug reaction, we stop the treatment. So if the drug reaction becomes uncontrolled and it's severe, then we can also classify the patient as treatment failed. So please, this is an important slide. So please memorize at least the first. Please memorize all outcomes and be familiar with the first four. Okay. So I mentioned this already. What the definition of loss to follow-up is. That is a patient whose treatment was interrupted for at least 2 consecutive months, or a patient who was diagnosed with active TB but was not started on treatment. Lastly, a patient who is not evaluated, there is no treatment outcome assigned, and probably and a possible scenario will be patients who transfer to another facility for continuation of treatment, but the final outcome was not determined. Okay? So this is one of the very important tables that you have to memorize. This is in the MOP as well. So, as I have mentioned, we won't go to the nitty-gritty of the dosing. We won't go to the nitty-gritty of treatment for drug-resistant tuberculosis. But at this point, you should be able to know how to screen patients using the 4 symptom screen or chest X-ray screening. You should be able to diagnose patients through the use of Gene Expert. We provided you with the categories. You should know the criteria for diagnosing a clinically diagnosed TB patient. Okay. And then what are the two treatment regimens, which has a 2-month intensive phase, pero depending upon whether extrapulmonary sites are involved or not, especially the CNS, bone, and joints, then the continuation phase might last for 10 months. We have also provided an overview of both the minor and the major adverse drug reactions. For the minor reactions, we don't stop the treatment, but we give palliative treatment, or not really palliative, a supportive rather. That's the better term. Supportive treatment. And for any adverse drug reactions, then we have to stop the medication and refer to the specialist. Lastly, we have also touched on the different possible treatment outcomes for the patient, whether the patients have completed treatment, there is treatment failure, the patient died, okay, or were otherwise lost to follow up. So the remaining two sections are actually quite weak already. So what is tuberculosis preventive treatment? I'm sure some of you might be asking, though, how about the contacts of diagnosed TB patients? What do we do with them? So these are the things that we have to do. But first, we have to define um, what what do you call this? What TPT, or tuberculosis preventive treatment, is. So tuberculosis preventive treatment, of course, is critical to end the epidemic of TB as per the WHO and TB strategy. And the primary targets for tuberculosis preventive treatment will be our PLHIV and child household contacts less than 5 years old. But as you will see in the succeeding slides, there are still, of course, certain categories or certain eligibility criteria, for TPT. So first, let us define some terms. So when we say contact investigation, this refers to the systematic process of identifying people who with previously undiagnosed TB among contacts of the index person with TB. Please take note that the index person, although for the most part, they could be the source person for the TB, it's not always the case. Okay, sometimes it's the first patient who consulted. So when we do contact investigation, we include the identification of the source person with the TB if the index person with TB is a child and as well as other candidates for preventive treatment. So what do we call a house who share the same enclosed living space as the index person with close contacts are not necessarily the same as household contacts. Okay? Close contacts are person who share an enclosed space, such as social gathering places, workplaces, or facilities, for extended periods during the day with the index person with TB during the 3 months before the treatment commences. Okay? So in other words, so let's give an example. You and your classmates are close contacts. Okay? If your classmate is your roommate, then that and your classmate turns out to be positive for TB or is the index person for TB, then you can consider that person, your classmate, as a household contact. Otherwise, many of your clinical instructors, the nurses that you work with, your classmates, other healthcare workers, they are close contacts because you're spending more than 3 hours. Uh, I mean, not more than 3 hours. You're spending extended periods of time with them during for at least 3 months. Okay, so please differentiate that. Okay, especially when you begin reporting in the wards, you will be asked: Is there a household contact? Is there a close contact? We have mentioned the so-called index case of TB. This is the first person that we identify with TB of any age in a specific household or other comparable settings. So in the classroom, you can have an index case. And the source case, which is what I mentioned earlier, this is the person with infectious TB who transmits the infection to one or more individuals. So in many instances, the index case is the source case, but sometimes the index case might be different from the source case, especially if the source case presents with milder symptoms and the index case presents with more severe symptoms, and this is the person who consults. Okay. For TB preventive treatment, the most important definition that you have to be familiar with will be latent tuberculosis infection. This refers to a state of persistent immune response to stimulation by Mycobacterium tuberculosis antigens, but there is no evidence of clinical manifestations of active TB disease. Okay, so just a few terms. When you say active TB disease, you have the infection plus the signs and the symptoms. When you have a latent tuberculosis infection or infection in general, you're already harboring the organism, but you're not showing any signs and symptoms yet. That is why we have to do chest X-ray screening during your annual physical examination, because there is really no gold standard for the identification of MTB infection. So what does that mean? How about Gene Expert? Gene Expert is our desired diagnostic test for active TB disease. Okay, so I hope that is clear. All of us can have latent TB, can be harboring latent TB infections, but not all of us are are experiencing active TB disease. I mentioned this earlier, TB preventive treatment. This is the treatment that we offer to individuals who are at risk of developing active TB in order to reduce the risk. Okay, so we also refer to it as LTBI treatment, where LTBI stands for latent tuberculosis infection or preventive therapy. I'm sure you have discussed this in one of your modules, the tuberculin skin test or the MANTO test. So we use the TST. In performing the TST, we make use of a standardized solution made with purified protein derivative. The PPD is derived from tuberculin, and this is injected under the skin. I am sure many of us have already undergone TST, and you know that PPD is able to produce a type 4 response or a T cell-mediated delayed type hypersensitivity reaction if the person has been infected with TB bacteria. So this is a good opportunity for you to review the four types of hypersensitivity reactions, types 1 to 4. You know that type 1 is your anaphylactic response, type 2 antigen, uh, antibody mediated, type 3 is antigen antibody complex mediated. Okay, and then type 4 is T cell mediated, and this is what is known as delayed type hypersensitivity. So TPT or tuberculosis preventive treatment is not administered to all individuals. There are certain eligibility criteria. So first, we have to classify whether an individual is a household contact, a close contact, a person living with HIV, or other high-risk groups. Okay. Then there are also categories where in the person it's not eligible for TPT. So what are the categories that required um, tuberculosis? Sorry. Um, so the eligibility of people for TB preventive treatment depends upon the results of the TST that we perform. That's why we discussed TST earlier. Okay, so first things first. So what I'm saying in this slide is that certain people are eligible for TB preventive treatment. At the same time, eligibility for TB preventive treatment depends upon the results of the TST. But not all individuals will require TST testing. So who are the individuals who are not candidates for TST testing but are still eligible for TPT? This includes individuals less than 5 years old with a bacteriologically confirmed tuberculosis index, or for those who are more than 5 years old, bacteriologically confirmed TB index, but with a risk for TB. So what are those risks? They include PLHIV, patients with diabetes, patients who smoke, those with immunosuppressive medical conditions. For children, these are the malnourished children, and if there are multiple people with TB in the same household. Otherwise, the other category in which TST is not required but is eligible for TPT will be people living with HIV more than or equal to 1 year old. Okay? TST, on the other hand, is required for all the other categories. Less than 5 years old, clinically diagnosed TB index, more than or equal to 5 years old, bacteriologically confirmed index, and there is no TB risk. Okay? For close contacts, all ages that are bacteriologically confirmed are candidate for TPT if the TST is positive. Otherwise, for all ages of close contacts, but only clinically diagnosed TB index, then they are not eligible for TPT. Other risk groups that require testing with PPD include patients receiving dialysis, patients preparing for an organ transplant or hematologic transplantation, patients initiating anti-tumor necrosis factor treatment, and patients with silicosis. Although silicosis is an occupational disease, and we don't see them very frequently these days. So once again, let us digest what we have shown you earlier through the use of this algorithm. So this is the algorithm for adults and children with HIV and are aged more than 5 years. So adults and children living with HIV, age 5 years and older, we screen them for the four symptom screening. Okay. If any of these symptoms are present, then we investigate for TB and other diseases. If the patient turns out to be TB on GeneXpert, then we treat for TB. If not TB, we can give TPT, okay, give preventive treatment. If none of these symptoms are present, then we perform a chest X-ray. If there are no lung findings suggestive of TB, then we give preventive treatment. Otherwise, if there are findings suggestive of TB, then we go to the right-hand side of the algorithm. In contrast, this is the algorithm for children with HIV and age 1 to 4 years old. Again, we screen them for any of these symptoms, but please remember from yesterday that aside from the four symptom screen, in children we also deal with malnourishment, with poor weight gain, with what do you call this? with wheezing, and all the other findings. If none of these findings are present, then we can give preventive treatment. Otherwise, if these findings are present for weight gain, fever, current cough, and importantly, a history of contact with a person with TB, then we have to investigate for TB. And if on gene expert or at least on lavage, because at this age people will have the difficulty expectorating, then we can give TB if the results are positive. Okay, we can still give preventive treatment if the results of the testing are not TB. What you will notice here is that in contrast to the first slide, in which we make use of a chest X-ray if none of the symptoms are present, here there is really no need to perform a chest X-ray if none of the symptoms are present. Then we directly give preventive treatment, regardless of the results of the symptom screening. For as long as these children who are living with who are living with HIV are age 1 to 4 years old, we can go directly to TPT. So we discussed first the individuals living with HIV. How about HIV negative individuals but are close contacts? Okay. So the flow chart appears to be quite complicated, but please take note that this essentially follows what we have learned yesterday for the screening of TB. So again, for these children, chest X-ray is not required prior to giving preventive treatment. So we have children less than 5 years of age who are household or close contacts of PTB cases. We check them for the symptoms. If they are well, then we categorize whether their household contact is a bacteriologically confirmed TB or a clinically diagnosed TB. If it's a bacteriologically confirmed TB, we give TPT already. However, if these are clinically diagnosed cases, as you have seen in the previous table, then we perform TST, and if the TST is positive, then we give preventive treatment. If negative or not available, then we have to advise the patient. Okay? If the patient is symptomatic but not lasting more than 4 weeks, then we check for the persistence of symptoms. If they resolve, we follow the same section of the algorithm. Otherwise, we ask whether they meet the presumptive criteria for TB, and then we follow the diagnostics algorithm. So how about for individuals more than 5 years old? So the flowchart will now require the use of chest X-ray. Okay, so we follow the screening algorithm for active TB, but because they are more than 5 years old, we can request for chest X-ray. If the chest X-ray is normal and there are no TB symptoms, we proceed directly to tuberculin skin testing. If the TST is positive, then we treat for LTBI, okay, or latent TB infection. Sometimes TST is not required. And these are the categories wherein they are not required. Actually, we have discussed this earlier. Individuals 5 years or older with TB risk factors, diabetics, smokers, immunosuppressive conditions, and they are household contacts of bacteriologically confirmed TB. Okay? If chest X-ray was not done, then we can actually do TST first. Okay? Again, if it's negative, we can proceed to giving the patient advice for TB. Otherwise, if the TST is positive, then we can perform a chest X-ray. If there are no abnormalities on the chest X-ray, we treat for latent tuberculosis infection. But if there are abnormalities, we investigate for TB and other diseases. If it turns out to be TB, then it becomes a clinically diagnosed TB, and we follow the treatment algorithm for clinically diagnosed TB. Otherwise, if it's not clinically diagnosed TB, then we treat for latent tuberculosis infection. So these are the treatment regimens available for latent tuberculosis infection, and you will notice that this is different from our treatment regimens. But currently, under the National Tuberculosis Program, only the 6H treatment regimen is available, and that is giving isoniazid daily. I'm not sure if rifampicin is widely available already, but for now, we are making use of the first treatment regimen. And then if the 3HP or the 3HP, there are other treatment regimens available if 3HP 3P is not available, such as 3HR for children and 4R for 6H treatment regimen, is the one that is usually available or widely available to us. Okay. This is actually the last part. We're quite quick, no? I guess that this is the effect of Zoom. So for the recording and the reporting of conditions, this is quite brief. And again, this is a relatively short section in the MOP. It's very detailed, but many of the contents there apply to other healthcare workers. But nevertheless, you have to be familiar with how to record and report your cases. So we won't go to the nitty-gritty. Again, what is important for me is for you to be able to review the different definitions in the MOP. So when we have patient records, we want to ensure that they are up to date. They're up to date regarding our patients, so including the diagnosis, the treatment, the follow-up examinations, the different treatment outcomes, and the post-treatment follow-up. The good thing about patient records is that they allow us, we can use them to audit health facilities providing TB services in order to determine whether drugs and supplies are available to the community. Patient records should adhere to RA 10767 or the so-called TB law. This is one of the two laws that you have to be familiar, but I'm sure you're already familiar with the second law, the Data Privacy Act. So let us just define some terms. So all health facilities have archives. And when we say we are archiving information, this is the process of transferring data or records in a less frequently used storage area. So usually who do we archive? Whose records do we archive? Patients who have died, patients who have completed treatment, patients who have, what do you call this, who have other diseases or have been lost to follow up for several years already. Otherwise, for patients who are actively being treated, we keep the records in the so-called storage area because we want ease in retrieving the data. Okay? Of course, it's now possible to retrieve or to store the data in computer-based storage methods. So data privacy is the aspect of data management that deals with determining what data in an information system can be shared with third parties. This is a usual question in ethics and legal med. What information can we share with others without the consent of the patient? And I'm sure you know that if it's for in the interest of the public, then definitely we can share data. But for TB, we usually only generate the summary reports. Okay? This is currently being implemented nationally, the Integrated TB Information System. This is our official TB register that is maintained in all health facilities regardless whether they are providing more advanced testing. Okay. So we have personal information and sensitive personal information. Personal information is more generic and it refers to any information, whether recorded or not, from which you can identify the entity of an individual reasonably. Okay. That is why before you publish case reports, di ba, um, we have to be able to sufficiently hide the identity of the individual, especially for delicate situations. Okay. On the other hand, sensitive personal information will include many personal information such as marital status, age, color, affiliation, health, education, and sexual history. So, in other words, sensitive personal information simply refers to what you see in the records. But personal information has a more utilitarian definition in the sense that you make use of personal information to ascertain who the person is. In sensitive personal information, you want to know certain details about the patient, and this is the privacy of patients is protected by RA 10173 or the Data Privacy Act. Actually, that ends our report. It's usually faster when we do it via Zoom. Do we have questions or areas of clarification for this? Ano?
Doc, I just wanted to clarify
Yes.
when you meant outcome unknown, can I
Hmm.
ask like what do you mean? What did you mean? Outcome
Come on,
unknown in the
sige. Let's
first
proceed. Let's
slide.
go back to that particular slide, okay? Are you referring to treatment outcome? Sorry.
Yes, doc. The first slide, I think it was in the first slide, treatment outcome unknown.
Which slide? When I
The
started
first,
the
yeah, yeah, yes,
discussion.
doc. Yes, doc. The first.
Let's proceed with that. Okay.
The second. Yeah, yes, doc. Here.
This one,
Previous.
the previous
Yes.
treatment outcome is unknown. So what we have here is that this usually refers to patients who knew that they took TB medications. But unfortunately, because of missing records, because of what do you call, unreliable na informants, then we cannot ascertain whether that patient has actually completed the 6 months, whether the patient was not lost to follow up, and or for that matter, whether the patient was taking the right duration. Okay, so what we know about these patients is that they took medications, but unfortunately, we don't have the records to show that they whether they completed the outcome or the outcome was or the outcome failed. Is that clear?
Yes, doc.
In
So it
contrast,
doesn't really matter if they took it or not. We are gonna treat them again, right? Like the other.
no, no. Sige, that's a very good point, actually. Thank you for that question. Okay, so when you said that we don't know the outcome, actually, remember that we first have to qualify patients whether they are new or whether they are retreatment. For new patients, these are the patients who has taken the medication, who took the medications for less than 1 month or have not taken the medications at all. For retreatment, these patients usually have taken the TB medications for at least 1 month. And usually, they have documents, they have the records to show that they have taken the medications for at least 1 month. In certain instances, although we do not recommend this, patients actually have like some calendar. In certain rural health units, this is what they actually do. They make the midwife sign the calendar, especially because in certain areas it's not really possible to for the patient to visit the facility on a daily basis. So they are given take home meds, although that is not ideal. So they can show that they have consumed this number of medications for X number of days. So when you say previous treatment outcome is unknown, we still have some proof that the patient underwent at least 1 month of treatment. However, after that 1 month, we are not sure whether these patients have completed their treatment or we are not sure whether these patients have been lost to follow up. And as I have mentioned, sometimes this applies to patients who have transferred facilities, but again, there's poor record keeping or the patient cannot recall the duration of the treatment or otherwise they refuse to follow up for a certain duration of time, but unfortunately it exceeded 2 months already. Okay. But what I'm emphasizing here is that when you interview patients for their history of TB and they say that they were treated with TB, we really have to exhaust all the records. We are lucky because some patients actually bring their old reports, their old medical certificates, and that is sufficient proof. Otherwise, if the patient only claims that they underwent treatment for TB, but the duration is unreliable. The informant cannot recall whether it was a 6 month or a 10 month continuation phase. Then definitely we can classify these patients as previous treatment outcome unknown. Otherwise, for relapse, treatment after failure, and treatment after loss to follow up, we have documents to support any of the first three categories. Is that clear or did I further confuse you?
No, doc. Thank you, doc.
Thank you so much for that question. Any other questions for the class? Let
So
me see if there are no comments or questions. So I was asked by Dr. Irish to come up with 20 questions for this, for the two lectures on TB. And of course, the MOP is very, very extensive. Okay, so the first thing that you have to do is I'll send later my PowerPoint to your class representative. And then most of the questions are actually already taken from this PowerPoint. But please do read certain parts of the TBMOP. You don't have to memorize, especially the procedures. Again, the TB-MOP actually takes several days of training, and I don't expect you. That will be unfair to you, of course, to ask you very specific details in the procedures when in fact it takes several days to master them. Okay, so most of the questions will be lifted from the PowerPoint. The greater bulk actually of my questions come from the diagnosis and the treatment part. Okay, especially the various categories that we have discussed. What differentiates bacteriologically confirmed from clinically diagnosed? Who is eligible to receive TPT? Who is eligible to undergo TST? Okay, what regimen will you give for patients with extrapulmonary TB involving the central nervous system? Okay, those are the things that I want you to pay particular attention to, and that will be a relatively easy quiz. Okay. Any questions? Clarifications? Because if there are none, then I suppose you can use, wait lang. It's this. That, okay. So otherwise, I'll give you the time to study further. Again, please, um, please pay particular attention to the algorithms, to the different algorithms that I have shared with you. And with that, this ends our lecture for today. Don't please feel free to send me a message if you have any clarifications, and I will try to reply as soon as possible. I will also take this opportunity to remind everyone, to those who haven't submitted their clinical queries. I have already approved of the clinical queries of some groups so they can begin working on their literature search. And again, this is not yet graded because your grade will be determined during your actual report. So the earlier you submit and the earlier your clinical queries are approved, the more fruitful and the stronger your presentation will be. Okay, so I hope that they can finish with all the inspections ongoing here in the school. I'm actually at the school right now, and I'll see you next week. No, not next week. Next week. Okay, for your reports. So have a good day, everyone.
Thank you, Doc.
Thank you, Doc.
Thank you, Doc. Thank you,
Thank you,
Doc.
Doc.
Thank you, Doc.
Thank you, Doc.